Yeah, hello, this is Dave from cheapbooks.com playing World of Tanks. This video is going to show you how to kill crew members on enemy tanks in the game World of Tanks. And this, of course, will apply to other games such as War Thunder, Ground Forces, and Armored Warfare and other tank games. Now, every tank, there's two ways to do it. One way is to look at the diagrams and memorize where all the crew members are. But there's another way, just simply by looking at a tank, you can determine where the crew members are. So the easiest one is going to be the driver. And if you look at the front of the tank, you'll notice that there's a gun turret over here on the left, and you've got these little viewports, and there's a little headlight, and there's another gun turret which looks like it points up in the air. And then on the right side, there's this little viewport thing. These are for two different people, and the crew members sit in these locations. So the one on the left has a gun, and it looks towards an angle to the side, etc., which means it's not the driver. It's probably the radio operator. The one on the right has viewports directly in front and somewhat to the side at an angle, which means that the driver is probably on the right. And if you want to kill those crew members, you would shoot directly under this turret or at the turret on either side, and you would hit those crew members. Or you could do it from the side. You'll notice that on the side you can see where these front turrets are, and you just have to aim in the line vertically with that, and you'll be able to kill perhaps both of those crew members as long as you penetrate. Now you'll notice over here there's a little hole. I'm going to show you what a gun sight looks like. It's on. You can see it clearly on an American tank destroyer. On the Scorpion you can see the gun hole, the gun sight. The gun sight is unfortunately right here. If you can see what I'm pointing at with the mouse, there's a small hole in the front to the left of the gun, and there's this gun sight, a scope. So there's a chair behind the scope, and that's where the gunner sits. The gunner is going to sit in this seat next to the gun, looking through that scope, which means if you shoot at the scope, you're going to hit the gunner in most cases, or the gunner will be behind that location. And you'll notice that over here there's some sort of a steering mechanism, like a steering wheel. And keep in mind that a steering wheel can be used to turn a gun or a turret. It's done the same way. And you'll see that the ammunition is here in the back, and there's a little seat over here on the left above the pirate logo. That has to be the loader, because the loader has to access the rear opening, which is the breech of the gun. He has to access the ammo. He's going to be sitting near it. That's where he's going to be sitting. So in terms of the gun scope, if we look at any tank, you're going to see, for example, over here you've got these two protruding objects which could be machine guns, and you've got this round part which could be a gun scope. We're going to look at some other tanks. You see that there's a hole over here on the right, and there's a hole on the left. There's going to be a gun scope behind those holes. And in some cases, you'll notice that there is an object protruding. Okay, it's not on that tank. There's some tanks where the gun scope is going to be visible on the roof of the tank. You can see over here there's a hole on the left and a hole on the right. We already looked at that one. You'll see here we've got machine guns, and we've got that hole. So the gunner is going to be looking through a hole, and we're going to go back to the KV-5. And when you look through that hole, there's going to be a gunner behind it. You'll see that there is also on the top, we've got a viewport, we've got a binoc, and we've got other viewports here and another binoc, and we've got some other small viewports, other viewports, and a machine gun. This has 6 members, so we're going to find all of them. Now the radio guy is almost always going to be in front next to the driver, and the driver is either going to be in the center or he's going to be underneath a viewport. So we're going to look for the drivers here. Over here you see there's a hatch with 2 viewports in the center, so the driver is in the center of the tank, in the front. Over here you see there's a center viewport and a hatch. The driver opens the hatch and his face is going to be right behind there. So if you shoot through the hatch is for him to both climb in and out, and so he can open the hatch and drive just looking through the hatch. So the driver is in the center on that tank. In this tank we see there's 2 viewports and a weird shape which could be a hatch cover, and the driver is going to be in the center there. For this tank, there's a viewport and 2 viewports in the center, which is going to be where the driver is going to be. This one also has a viewport in the middle, and it looks like there is a round hatch. So the driver is going to be right below that. So if you look at the side view, you find that viewport, and the driver is going to be right behind, right underneath that. And we're going to look at a side view of another tank. You'll see that there is a viewport over here in the middle, and the driver is probably going to be right under that viewport. And over here you see there's a viewport in the center. There's one on the side here at an angle and another one on this angle. And it looks like there's supposed to be a hatch there. It's hard to tell. So the driver is going to be right underneath that viewport and right underneath this viewport. And the same is going to be true with every class of tank. We'll look at some American tanks. This one you'll see that there's a viewport on the left with a machine gun, which means it's probably the radio operator, and there's a viewport on the right, which is probably the driver. And you'll notice that there is a hatch on the right and there's a hatch on the left where they climb out of. So the driver is going to be right under here, underneath that spindle. He's going to be behind this track tread. We'll look at the Chrysler. For the Chrysler, obviously there's an engine in the front. He is a driver in the front. Well, the turret has crew members inside of the turret and ammo. And the turret is not just the top part, it's also underneath. And then there will probably be ammo on this side. And then you're going to have the engine in front of the turret on the left half, and there will be gas tanks. The engine will be more in the center, and the gas tanks will be on the edges. So there has to be a driver here in the front. And if you look very closely under the gun here, you'll see a very small, what looks like it could be a viewport or 2. And chances are the driver is probably right here in the middle of the tank. M103, you'll see that there are 3 viewports and something that looks like it could be a hatch. The driver would be in the center underneath that viewport, or you could hit on the side right through there. Now we'll check on the M6A2E1, also known as the Mutant. You'll see that there's a viewport on the right and a viewport on the left. So chances are there's going to be a radio operator and a driver, one on each side. Not necessarily true. This one is harder to tell. There's a hatch over here, and there's a hatch over here. So there's probably a driver on the right under that viewport and a radio. Well, I don't know if the driver's on the right or the left. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to look at, this one has a gun on the left, which is probably controlled by the radio operator. And you got the viewport and a viewport on the right with hatches. And the driver is going to be under there. Let's look at some other tanks. We'll skip the Chinese because they're similar to some of the other countries. This one you see there's 2 hatches over here, which is probably going to be for the radio operator and the driver. And plus they have viewports. I don't know which side the driver and the radio operator are on. However, if there is an antenna, there could be an antenna which would be on the side of the radio operator, because obviously he's going to be near the radio equipment. Let's look at some other tanks. Okay, so those are heavy tanks. We're going to look at some more specialized tanks. T-28 concept. The engine is here in the back. The fuel tanks are usually going to be on the left and the right of the engine. There's a turret here, the driver, there's a viewport in the center. The driver is probably right under that viewport. There is no radio operator. Okay, Dickermax. The Dickermax has the crew compartment behind, engine in the front. There are two hatches here on the top. There is a radio operator, and over here in the front of these two hatches, these protruding elements are viewports, but they have protection to protect them from machine gun fire. And it looks like there's a viewport on the side. You'll notice there's no viewport on this side, so the driver is probably here on the right side. And is there a radio operator? Yes, he's probably on the left side. So we can look at the interior, and you can see that there are two seats here for two additional crew. The gunner would have to be near the gun, and he would have a scope. It looks like there's a scope protruding from the roof. It's a vertical scope. And there would be the commander, and the loader would have to be near the ammunition, which I do not see visible within the tank, and he would have to be near the back of where the breech is so he can put the ammunition in the back. Usually it's a staggered layout. You'll see a staggered layout on a lot of tanks. Okay, so I think you'll be able to find the driver on most tanks, and you'll be able to find the radio operator on most tanks using the method that I described. Sometimes the radio operator might be in the turret. So we're going to move on to some of the next crew members. Now, if you notice on the top, there are three hatches, all that have viewports, and there's one that has viewports all around. The one that has viewports in all directions is probably the commander, because the commander is going to look in all directions. So over here we have a hatch, got a viewport over here, and you'll notice that there is a viewport, which I'm highlighting with the mouse. I wish I could get closer to it, which looks in all directions, and that's where the commander is going to be. He's probably going to be directly under that. This one has many hatches, and there's one that has viewports in all directions here in the center. That's probably where the commander is. Kananen Yag Panzer. I realize a lot of you don't have this tank. You'll notice that there's this one here has viewports in all directions, and this one here has viewports in all directions. But it looks like the one in the rear is better equipped, which means it's probably the commander. The driver, you'll notice that there's three viewports looking in directions for a driver, which means the driver is probably over here on the right. The gunner is probably here on the left. So you probably have driver, gunner on the left, commander or loader is going to be here behind the driver, with access to the ammunition and with access to the breech of the gun. The ammunition is probably going to be in this triangular space behind the rear view mirror here, because the loader has to be able to access the ammunition. I'm going to show you a few other examples. You'll notice in this tank there's a slope here on the right. The ammunition is going to be in this area. One of the best ones to look at, something like a Ferdinand is going to have the ammunition here on the right, but the Japanese heavy tanks and the Tiger are really good for finding ammunition. You'll note that there's the driver with his hatch here on the left. There is a gun here on the right, which is probably a radio operator. And then over here, there's a slanted part, and behind that is a whole row of ammunition going along here and on the side. So it's going to be behind this cable, behind this red tail light, this bar going across. And we're going to look at it on a Tiger. You'll see the same thing. You'll notice on a Tiger, the turret doesn't go all the way to the side. Over here on the right, there's this rectangular area. The turret doesn't go all the way to the side, which means the ammo rack is probably right here going along the side next to the turret. The loader is going to be next to that ammo rack. The commander is probably going to have this hatch over here. so that he has, okay, you see here that there's viewports in all directions, which means that the commander is probably going to be under those viewports because he wants to see in all directions. Again, you're going to have the radio guy here on the left where this gun is. You're going to have the driver with the little view hatch that can open up and the viewports above. The gunner is going to have a hole with the scope behind it. And let's see if there's a loader. The loader is going to have to be convenient in the space, convenient to the ammo, which is going to be underneath this big hatch, and the commander is where all these viewports are, so he can get a view of all directions of the tank. So this is the basic methodology you use to find crew members in different tanks. I'm going to show you some other tanks. Okay, so now we have there's no radio operator, so the driver is under the viewport on the left. The space on the right probably has ammo. You have a hatch over here and a hatch over here. There's probably a crew member right underneath that hatch, so you just shoot right in that direction, and there's probably another crew member right underneath that hatch, which means that there's going to be one more crew member, and the ammo is going to be in the space to the left, and there's a cargo box hanging on the back. It's probably not ammo. So you're going to have ammo over here, 2 crew members, and there's probably another one behind this hatch opening over here. There's probably another crew member right there. STRV. A little bit more difficult. There's going to be a driver who is probably here on the right because there's viewports on the right. And then we have this top mounted machine gun with viewports in all directions is probably the commander. You see that there's a little gun scope protruding from the gun mantle. The gunner is going to be right behind the gun scope, and he has to be within the turret. So he's probably behind that flag, and then the loader, the ammunition is here in the back. The loader is going to have to be underneath this viewport behind this flag. So if you can hit that flag, you can kill the loader and the gunner with one shot. You'll notice here we've got an engine in the back. The engine is not the full width. The engine does not it doesn't go above the tracks. So the fuel tanks are going to be above the tracks, or the ammo will be above the tracks. The engine will take up the space here in the middle, and there could be fuel tanks behind the muffler here. Because the engines are not fat. They tend to be a little bit more tall and occupy like perhaps 30% of the engine. They don't occupy the full width from track to track. There's going to be a rear axle. The way to spot the rear axle is you look at the tread where it gets the fattest, and that's going to be where the rear axle goes across. Obviously you can see it on the spindle over here. So if you want to set the engine on fire, you shoot at that spindle and you hit that rear axle. Same with the front axle. It's going to be where the treads are the fattest going across. Okay, so we've got a doorway over here for a crew member to go in and out. It looks like there's another hatch over here. There's another hatch over here and a door over here. You'll see that there's a seat inside of there, and there's another chair inside of there. There's a scope right over here, which means the gunner is going to probably be sitting in that seat on the right. I don't see a hatch for the driver, but you'll notice that on the left here, on the upper left, there is a hatch probably for the driver, so the driver is probably sitting here in the upper left. The loaders are probably in the back, and where does the commander sit? I don't know for this particular tank. It's possible he just stands here in the open area operating the machine gun. Because it's an SPG, it's definitely within the realm of possibility. Okay, so here we have a hatch that opens in the front. There is a radio man and a driver. They're sitting side by side in the front. There is a gunner and a commander. You can see the seats on the inside. The gunner is going to have the front seat. So there's a scope right over here to the right of the turret. You would kill the gunner. You could kill the gunner and the commander probably with the same shot. That's probably where the commander sits. He can operate the gun. And there's a seat over there for the loader. The loader has access to the breech of the gun, and he's going to have ammunition. Now the engine is going to be here in the center. You're going to have the axle going across where the tread becomes the fattest, or right here where the spindle is. So you got the axle, you have the engine more towards the center. The gas tanks will be on the left and on the right of the engine, and possibly here you can see that there's a muffler. Obviously there could be a space for a fuel tank. And the ammunition is probably here in these boxes, or right behind this part of the treads is another place to store ammo. In some tanks there will be ammo in the front. If there's no person occupying that space, there could be ammo in the front. So you could probably ammo rack this tank by shooting at this hatch over here on the right side above the tread, or shooting at the hatch on the left side above the tread. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about tanks in terms of weak spots. You'll notice that you have these hooks on the front, and you've got these headlights. This one has a slit through it, which is probably used so that you cannot see it visibly from the air. It's like a low light headlight. None of these are weak spots. The headlights are external and they don't penetrate the armor, and these hooks are external. They don't penetrate the armor, so don't shoot at them. They're not weak spots. Things like a gun, they have to make an opening in the armor in order to put the gun in. And same with these hatches, so they tend to be weak spots. The armor is going to be weak because that's actually a part that has to move. So it can't be solid, it can't be riveted in. And the gun has to have some movement also. So those are going to be weak spots. Another way to find weak spots is to look for small armor plates. You'll notice that these plates here on the side, on the corner, are smaller than, for example, this frontal plate. Because it's smaller, it's going to get hit less often, so they're going to use weaker armor. Not always true, but in general, it's a good general way to find a weak spot. Another thing is the lower plate on most tanks is going to be weaker. However, it's not always true. Because some tank manufacturers, they know that the enemy is going to shoot at the lower plate, so they might put stronger armor on the lower plate. For example, the Chaffee has stronger armor on the side than it does on the front. You'll notice here there are some boxes on the outside of this tank, but it doesn't look like the loader from inside the tank would be able to have access to these boxes, so they might store ammo, but if it does store ammo, it's not something that the loader has constant access to. You'll notice that there's something over here that looks like it could be a fuel tank, and we've got some objects here that look like they could be tanks, and they have some tubes running between them. Those are probably fuel tanks above the tire over here. The engine, of course, is almost always going to be mounted right here in the center. The ammo, because the crew members are in a certain location, is probably in the turret. If you find the commander or the crew hatch and you look to the right, there's a little bit of space to put ammunition. This one does not have a radio operator, and you notice the driver's on the right, so there's a good chance that behind these headlights there could be ammo stored also underneath the gun on the left side of the driver. Good place to store ammo. You notice that there's a gun pointing through here, or it could be a scope. That could be easily a scope for the gunner to sit behind. Okay, so that's the method that you use to find crew members and weak spots. Some of these external objects, like these external tanks, are not weak spots. Some of them might be, some of them aren't. But basically, look for anything that could be a hatch. Something that's a headlight is not going to be a weak spot. Muffler will not be a weak spot because it's external. The gun mantlet is not a weak spot. The gun mantlet is right where the gun is some of the strongest armor in the game around the gun. The other thing you can do is you can actually shoot at the gun, and you can hit the gun and damage the gun. So if you have an opportunity to just hit the gun, that's another thing you can do to put the gun out of action. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments, please post below.